Oscar Rowanvale, 19 years old. Until 3 weeks ago, I believed family meant showing up for each other no matter what. Then I found out my father had died through a Facebook post from someone I barely knew from high school. He'd been gone for 2 weeks already, buried beneath the dogwoods in Elmsbrook, Massachusetts, while I was cramming for midterms in my Vermont dorm room. No phone call, no letter, no chance to say goodbye. My stepmother, Delora, made sure of that. What made it worse was discovering he'd been writing to me in secret for 2 years, letters I treasured, proving he still cared. His last words to me were in a letter that arrived the day after I learned he was dead. Eska, some truths are buried deeper than graves. But here's what nobody expected. I wasn't going to let them erase me from his story. Before we jump back, and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The drive back to Elmsbrook felt like traveling through time itself. Every mile marker on Route 2 pulled me deeper into memories I'd spent 2 years trying to outrun. The October maples blazed overhead, their crimson leaves spiraling down like confetti for a celebration I wasn't invited to attend. My godmother. Odie's beat-up Honda wheezed as we climbed the hills approaching my hometown, and I pressed my forehead against the cool window, watching familiar landmarks emerge from the afternoon haze. "You don't have to do this today, sweetheart," Odie said for the fourth time since we'd left her bookstore in Brattleboro that morning. Her weathered hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, knuckles white against the warm leather. "We could get a hotel room, give you time to prepare." I shook my head, fingering the envelope in my lapdad's final letter, postmarked 3 days before his death. Inside, his familiar handwriting had spelled out words that haunted me. "The truth about your mother's things is in the oak box beneath my desk. Delora doesn't know it exists." Below that, almost as an afterthought, "I'm sorry I wasn't braver, Eska. You deserved better." The first thing that struck me as we turned onto Maple Street was how unchanged everything looked. The Pettigrew house still needed a fresh coat of paint. Mrs. Henderson's rose garden still sprawled magnificently over her white picket fence. The ancient elm that I climbed countless times still stretched its massive branches over the sidewalk, though now I noticed the orange spray paint marking it for removal. Even in my absence, time had been slowly erasing pieces of my childhood. Our house, Dad's house, I corrected myself, sat at the end of the street like a Tudor Revival museum piece. Delora had always been proud of its historic designation, the brass plaque by the front door proclaiming it built in 1887. The ivy still climbed the stone walls in neat, manicured columns, and the leaded glass windows caught the afternoon light the same way they had when Mom was alive. But something felt different. The warmth was gone. It looked like a house where people lived, not a home where they belonged. "Jesus," Odie breathed, pulling into the driveway behind Delora's pristine BMW. "She remodeled the garden." I stared at the space where Mom's wildflower garden had bloomed in glorious chaos for 15 years. Now it was all straight lines and designer shrubs, a geometric pattern that probably cost more than Odie's monthly rent. Not a single trace remained of the daffodils Mom had planted this spring before she died, the ones that had returned faithfully every year until now. "She erased her," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. Odie reached over and squeezed my hand. "Plants can be moved, honey. Doesn't mean they're gone forever." Before I could respond, the front door opened. Delora emerged like a figure from a gothic novel, dressed in tailored black that probably cost more than my semester's tuition. Even in grief, if that's what this was, she looked like she'd stepped from the pages of Architectural Digest. Her dark hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, and her makeup was flawless, despite the fact that she'd supposedly been mourning her husband for 2 weeks. Eska, her voice carried across the driveway like a cool breeze, polite but distant. I wasn't expecting you. I climbed out of the car, my legs unsteady after the 3-hour drive. No, I imagine you weren't. We faced each other across the space where Dad's car should have been parked. 2 women who had shared a house for 3 years, but had never shared anything else. Delora's eyes flicked to Odie, who was standing protectively beside me like a warrior. Priestess in a cardigan and sensible shoes. Mrs. Blake, Delora acknowledged with a slight nod. Thank you for bringing her safely. It's the least I could do, Odie replied, her voice carrying an edge that could cut glass, considering she had to hear about Theodore's death through social media. A flush crept up Delora's neck, the only crack in her composed facade. The funeral was small, family only. I thought it would be too painful for Eska, given how things ended between her and Theodore. The lie sat between us like a physical presence. Things hadn't ended between Dad and me. They'd been severed by Delora's careful manipulation, by her insistence that his continued relationship with me was unhealthy and preventing him from moving forward. But he'd never truly let me go. The letters prove that. I'd like to see his study, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There are some things you wanted me to have. Delora's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly. I'm afraid that's not possible. The estate is being settled by my attorney. Nothing can be removed until the will is probated. I'm not talking about removing anything valuable, I said, pulling Dad's letter from my pocket. Just some personal items, letters, maybe a book or 2. Her eyes fixed on the envelope in my hand with laser focus. What is that? A letter from Dad, his last one to me. I watched her face carefully as I spoke. He wrote to me regularly, even after I left. The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. For a moment, the mask slipped completely, and I saw something that looked almost like fear. That's impossible, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Theodore barely left the house these past months. He was too ill to what? To mail letters to his daughter? I took a step closer. He managed to get to the post office just fine, Delora, every month for 2 years. Odie moved closer to my shoulder, a silent show of support. Perhaps we should discuss this inside, she suggested diplomatically. Delora hesitated, glancing between us as if calculating odds. Finally, she stepped aside. Of course, please, come in. The house smelled different. Gone was the scent of Dad's pipe tobacco and the lavender sachets Mom had hidden in every closet. Now it smelled like expensive candles and furniture polish, sterile and impersonal. The hardwood floors gleamed like mirrors, and I noticed that all the family photos that had once lined the hallway had been replaced with abstract art pieces that probably came from Delora's gallery. Coffee? Delora offered, leading us toward the kitchen. I just made a fresh pot. That would be nice, Odie said, though I could tell she was as uncomfortable as I was. The kitchen had been completely renovated. Where Mom's cozy breakfast nook had been, now there was a marble island that looked like it belonged in a magazine. The window where she'd grown herbs on the sill was now adorned with a contemporary sculpture that seemed to mock the memory of her little pots of basil and rosemary. You've made a lot of changes, I observed, accepting the coffee cup Delora handed me. Theodore wanted to modernize, she said smoothly. He felt it was time to move into the 21st century. Another lie. Dad had loved this house exactly as it was when Mom was alive. He used to say the walls held too many happy memories to change, But I didn't challenge her. Not yet. Where is he buried? I asked instead. Hillside Cemetery. Section C, beneath the dogwood grove. Her voice softened slightly. He always loved those trees. That much was true. Dad and I used to walk through that section every Sunday after church when I was small, admiring the way the pink and white blossoms created a canopy over the older graves. He joked that when his time came, he wanted to rest somewhere beautiful. I'd like to visit, I said. Of course. She set down her coffee cup with a delicate clink. Perhaps tomorrow would be better. I'm sure you're tired from the drive. I studied her face, looking for tells. Delora was many things, but she'd never been genuinely considerate of my feelings. This sudden concern felt like a stalling tactic. Actually, I was hoping to see Dad's study now. The letter mentioned something specific he wanted me to find. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. As I mentioned, the estate attorney has advised against disturbing anything until probate is complete. It's a legal matter, you understand. What I understand, I said carefully, is that my father's personal correspondence with me shouldn't be subject to estate law. And if there are items that belong to my mother, those were never legally Delora's to begin with. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Delora's composure cracked further, revealing something sharp and defensive underneath. Your mother has been dead for 7 years, Aska. Whatever belonged to her became part of this household when Theodore and I married. That's how marriage works. Not her personal effects, Odie interjected quietly. Not items that were clearly intended for her daughter. Delora's eyes flashed. And you are here in what capacity exactly, Mrs. Blake? As far as I know, you have no legal standing in this family. I'm here as someone who loved Theodore like a brother, Odie said, her voice gaining strength. Someone who promised my best friend on her deathbed that I'd look after her daughter. Someone who's been picking up the pieces of what you've broken for 2 years. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking away the seconds, marking time that Dad would never have again. Finally, Delora set down her cup and stood. I think it's best if you leave now, she said, her voice ice cold. When you're ready to approach this situation through proper legal channels, you can have your attorney contact mine. My attorney? I almost laughed. Delora, I'm 19 years old and working 3 jobs to pay for college. I don't have an attorney. Then perhaps you should get one. She moved toward the kitchen door, clearly expecting us to follow. I'm sure Mrs. Blake can recommend someone suitable. I stood slowly, my mind racing. This wasn't just about grief or even dislike anymore. Delora was hiding something, and it was big enough to make her risk looking cruel and heartless in front of a witness. Dad's letter had mentioned a box beneath his desk, something Delora didn't know existed. If she was this desperate to keep me out of his study, maybe that box contained more than just sentimental items. Before I go, I said, pulling out my phone, I'd like to take some pictures. For memory's sake. Pictures of what? The house. Dad's things. I never got to say goodbye, remember? I started snapping photos of the kitchen, the renovated spaces, the missing family photos. I'm sure you can understand wanting some kind of closure. Delora's face went white again, but she couldn't object without seeming even more heartless. I methodically photographed our route back to the front door, paying special attention to the hallway that led to Dad's study. The door was closed, and I noticed a new deadbolt that definitely hadn't been there when I lived here. Thank you for the coffee, I said politely as we reached the front door. I'm sure we'll be seeing each other again soon. I wouldn't count on that, Delora replied, but there was uncertainty in her voice now, Dot, as we walked back to the car. I felt her watching us from the window. Odie didn't say anything until we were out of the driveway and headed toward the town center. "That woman is afraid of something," she said finally. "Terrified?" I agreed. "The question is what? And how do I find out without getting arrested for breaking and entering?" Odie was quiet for a moment, then smiled grimly. "Who said anything?" "About breaking and entering? You still know people in this town, don't you? People who might remember your father fondly enough to help his daughter get what's rightfully hers." I thought about Fing Talbot, my childhood friend who still lived next door to Dad's house. About Mabel Finster, who'd cleaned our house for 30 years before Delora drove her away. About all the neighbors who'd watched me grow up and had probably wondered where I disappeared to. "Yeah," I said slowly. "I think I do." The Elmsbrook Historical Society occupied a converted Victorian mansion on Main Street, its gingerbread trim painted in historically accurate shades of green and cream. I'd spent countless afternoons here as a child, helping Dad research local genealogies for his academic papers while I played among the archived maps and old photographs. Now, as I pushed through the heavy oak door, the familiar scent of old paper and lemon oil triggered a flood of memories so intense I had to pause and catch my breath. "Can I help you?" The voice came from behind a massive oak desk piled high with manila folders and computer printouts. A young man with dark hair and kind eyes looked up from a ledger, and for a moment I thought I was seeing a ghost. "Finn?" I whispered, though his face transformed as recognition dawned. "Eska?" "Jesus, Eska Rollenvale?" He was around the desk and pulling me into a hug before I could respond. And suddenly I was 19 again, but feeling like the 14-year-old girl who used to sit in the same building, reading while her father worked upstairs in the archives. "I can't believe you're here," he said, holding me at arm's length to study my face. "I heard about your dad. I'm so sorry. I wanted to call, but I wasn't sure. After you left." "You heard about the funeral?" I asked carefully. His expression darkened, if you can call it that. Delora held it at Preston and Sons instead of at the church. Maybe 20 people total. She said it was what Theodore wanted, but he shook his head. "Your dad loved this community. Half the town would have come to pay their respects if they'd known, but they didn't know because she didn't tell them." It wasn't a question. The obituary ran in the Globe, not the local paper. And it was tiny, maybe 3 lines. Just his name, dates, and survived by his wife. No mention of services, no mention of you. Finn's jaw tightened. "It felt wrong, Eska. Really wrong." I sank into one of the leather chairs beside his desk, the weight of the last few hours settling on my shoulders like a lead blanket. She wouldn't let me into his study today. Put a deadbolt on the door and everything. "That's interesting." Finn leaned against his desk, crossing his arms. "Because your dad was here just 2 weeks before he died. He was asking about the property. Records for your house, specifically about any outbuildings or additions that might not show up on standard surveys." My pulse quickened. "What kind of outbuildings?" "That's what was weird. Your house doesn't have any outbuildings, and your dad knew that better than anyone. He'd done the historical survey himself when he bought the place." Finn rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "But he kept asking about hidden spaces, places where someone might store important documents. Like he was looking for something that should have been there but wasn't." I pulled Dad's letter from my pocket and showed Finn the relevant passage. He mentioned a box beneath his desk. "Something Delora doesn't know about." Finn read the letter twice, his frown deepening. "Eska, I hate to ask this, but do you think there's any chance your dad's death wasn't natural?" The question hung in the air like smoke. I'd been so focused on Delora's behavior and my own grief that I hadn't allowed myself to consider the possibility. What do you mean? He wasn't sick. I mean, not really. He'd lost some weight over the past few months, seemed tired, but nothing that suggested he was dying. Finn lowered his voice, and the timing is suspicious. He comes here asking about hidden spaces, writes you that letter about finding the truth, and then dies suddenly 2 weeks later. A chill ran down my spine. You think Delora killed him? I think Delora is hiding something big enough to risk looking like a monster to keep you away from it. He stood up and moved to a filing cabinet. Want to see something interesting? He pulled out a manila folder and spread its contents across his desk. Property records, deed transfers, historical surveys, all related to our house on Maple Street. Your dad requested these documents 3 weeks before he died. Finn explained, pointing to a request form in Dad's familiar handwriting. Look at what he was specifically interested in. I scanned the papers, noting Dad's penciled annotations in the margins. He'd circled several references to structural modifications made in 1923 and highlighted a note about sealed chambers discovered. During renovations, sealed chambers, I looked up at Finn. In our house. According to the survey from 1975, the house had several small hidden spaces typical of Prohibition-era construction. Most were filled in during a renovation in the 60s, but one was left intact behind a false wall in what's now the study. My heart began to race. Behind a false wall? Behind the built-in bookcases on the east wall. There's supposedly a space about 4 feet by 6 feet, accessible through a hidden panel. Finn grinned. Your dad used to joke that every old house should have a secret room. Looks like yours actually does. I stared at the documents, pieces of a puzzle beginning to click into place. Dad hadn't mentioned a box beneath his desk in his letter he'd mentioned. A box beneath his desk, as in below the room where his desk sat, in the hidden chamber. Finn, I said slowly, how well do you know the neighborhood watch schedule? Pretty. Well, my grandmother coordinates it. His eyes lit up with understanding. Why? What are you thinking? I'm thinking that Delora can't watch that house 24 hours a day. And I'm thinking that if my father wanted me to find something badly enough to risk writing about it, then he probably made sure I'd be able to find it. That sounds dangerously close to breaking and entering. I stood up, energy coursing through. Me for the first time since I'd learned of Dad's death. Not if I'm retrieving my own property from my family home. Besides, technically, I never surrendered my key. Finn stared at me for a long moment, then began gathering up the property records. My grandmother is on watch duty tonight from 10 to midnight. She covers the entire east side of Maple Street, including your house. And she's been known to take extended coffee breaks at my house, especially when it's cold. Funny how those breaks always seem to last exactly long enough for someone to slip in and out of a neighboring property. He handed me a copy of the building survey. Hypothetically speaking, of course. I felt a smile tug at the corners of my mouth for the first time in weeks. Of course. Hypothetically. As I folded the papers and slipped them into my jacket pocket, Finn caught my arm gently. Eska, be careful. If Delora is desperate enough to lock down your father's study and cut you out of his funeral, she might be desperate enough to do worse if she catches you. I know. I covered his hand with mine. But, Finn, I can't let her erase me from his life. I can't let her rewrite our history to suit her narrative. If there's something in that house that proves my father cared about me, that he wanted me to have some piece of our family legacy, then I have to find it. What if what you find isn't what you expect? What if the truth is worse than not knowing? I thought about that as I walked back to where Odie was waiting in the car. What if Dad's hidden box contained evidence that he'd chosen Delora over me more deliberately than I'd realized? What if his secret correspondence had been motivated by guilt rather than love? What if the truth about his death revealed something? I'd rather not know. But as I climbed into the passenger seat and looked back at the Historical Society, where Finn was watching me through the window with concern and affection, I realized I'd already made my choice. I'd been living with questions and half-truths for 2 years. I'd been carrying the weight of feeling erased, unwanted, forgotten. Whatever the truth was, it couldn't be worse than the uncertainty that had been eating away at me. How did it go? Odie asked as we pulled away from the curb. I found out our house is a secret room, I said. And I think I'm going to rob it tonight. Odie was quiet for several blocks. Then she started laughing, the kind of delighted, mischievous laughter that had gotten us both in trouble more times than I could count. Well, she said finally, I suppose we'd better find you some dark clothes and a good flashlight. The bed and breakfast where Odie had booked us rooms sat on the outskirts of town, a rambling Victorian that had been converted into lodging for tourists seeking authentic New England charm. Our rooms were small but cozy, with floral wallpaper and antique furniture that creaked companionably when you moved. I tried to nap after our reconnaissance mission, but sleep felt impossible with adrenaline and grief warring in my chest. Instead, I sat by the window overlooking the town center, watching the late afternoon light turn the maple trees into torches of red and gold. From here, I could see the spire of the church where Mom and Dad had been married, where I'd been baptized, where we'd attended services every Sunday until Mom got too sick to leave the house. Now, even that felt like a piece of my history that Delora could claim or erase at will. A soft knock interrupted my brooding. Come in, I called, expecting Odie with dinner plans or encouragement. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Instead, the door opened to reveal a woman I recognized but couldn't immediately place silver-haired. 70s, with bright blue eyes and the kind of face that suggested a lifetime of smiling. Mabel? I stood up quickly, memories flooding back. Mabel Finster? Hello, sweetheart. Our former housekeeper stepped into the room and enveloped me in a hug that smelled like vanilla and fresh bread. Finn Talbot called and told me you were in town. I hope you don't mind me tracking you down. Mind? God, no. I'm so glad to see you. I gestured to the small sitting area. Please sit. Can I get you anything? Just a few minutes of your time, dear. Mabel settled into the upholstered chair with the careful movements of someone whose bones ached but whose spirit remained strong. I wanted to pay my respects. Your father was a good man, Eska. A complicated man, especially after your mother died, but a good one. You knew him better than almost anyone, I said, settling on the edge of the bed. You were with our family. For what, 30 years? 32, until that woman made it clear I wasn't welcome anymore. Mabel's voice held no bitterness, just resignation. She said they were simplifying their lifestyle and wouldn't need help anymore. But I think she just didn't like having someone around who remembered how things used to be. How were things at the end? With Dad, I mean. Mabel was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Your father was troubled, sweetheart. Especially these last few months. He'd lost weight, wasn't sleeping well. But it wasn't illness that was eating at him. It was conscience. What do you mean? He knew he'd failed you. Maybe not intentionally, but he knew that in trying to keep peace with his new wife, he'd lost his daughter. And that knowledge was destroying him. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped package. He asked me to give you this, if anything ever happened to him. My hands shook as I unwrapped the tissue paper to reveal a small wooden box, no bigger than my palm. It was carved with intricate vines and flowers, the same pattern that had decorated Mom's jewelry box, the one that had mysteriously disappeared after Delora moved in. "It's beautiful," I whispered, running my fingers over the smooth wood. "Open it?" Mabel urged gently. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was a key. An old-fashioned brass key, ornate and heavy, the kind that might open a door or a chest or something important from another era. "What does it open?" "I'm not sure," Mabel admitted. "But your father was very specific about when I should give it to you. He said if Delora tries to keep Eska away from her inheritance, give her the key and tell her to look where her mother's love letters are hidden." My breath caught. Mom's love letters? Your parents wrote to each other constantly, even after they were married. Sweet notes, romantic letters, little messages left around the house. Your mother saved every one. Mabel's eyes softened with memory. She used to joke that she was creating a historical record of their love story. But I never found any letters when I was packing to leave. I looked everywhere for some piece of them together. That's because they're not in the obvious places, dear. Your mother was clever about hiding things that mattered to her. She learned that lesson from her own mother, who lived through the Depression and never quite trusted that valuable things would stay safe in plain sight. I turned the key over in my palm, feeling its weight and warmth. "Mabel, what do you think really happened to Dad? I mean, was he actually sick?" The older woman's expression grew troubled. "I can't say for certain, but I can tell you what I observed. Your father was healthy as a horse most of his life. Never. Even caught colds when the rest of us were dropping like flies. But these past few months, he started having what he called spells. Dizziness, nausea, terrible headaches. Did he see a doctor? That's what was strange. Delora insisted on taking him to some specialist in Boston instead of Dr. Morrison, who'd been your family physician for 20 years. And she was very protective of his medical information. Wouldn't let anyone else go with him to appointments, didn't want to discuss his treatment. Mabel leaned forward slightly. The timing bothered me too. These spells started right around the time your father began asking questions about legal documents and inheritance law. A chill ran down my spine. You think she was poisoning him? I think your father discovered something that threatened Delora's version of how things should be. And I think she took steps to make sure he couldn't act on that discovery. Mabel stood up slowly. But that's just the suspicious mind of an old woman who's cleaned up after too many family secrets. She moved toward the door, then paused. Eska, dear, be very careful tonight. Word travels fast in a small town, and Delora has connections I wouldn't underestimate. How did you know about your midnight adventure? Honey, I've been keeping house in this town for 50 years. I know when people are planning mischief. She smiled warmly. Just make sure you look in the right places. Your mother's hiding spots were always more clever than obvious. After Mabel left, I sat staring at the key until the room grew dark around me. Somewhere in my childhood home, my mother had hidden a collection of love letters that might explain everything Dad's recent behavior, Delora's desperation, the real reason I'd been excluded from his life and death. At 9:30, I dressed in dark clothes and met Odie in the parking lot. She'd equipped herself with a small backpack containing flashlights, snacks, and what looked suspiciously like lock-picking tools. "Where did you get those?" I asked, pointing at the slender metal implements. "I wasn't always a respectable bookstore owner, darling. Sometimes a misspent youth comes in handy." She shouldered the pack and grinned at me, ready to solve some family mysteries. As we drove through the quiet streets toward Maple Street, I thought about all the things that had led to this moment Mom's death. Dad's remarriage, my exile, his secret letters, and now this midnight mission to reclaim pieces of my own history. It felt like the culmination of years of being pushed to the margins of my own life. of accepting other people's versions of who I was and what I deserved. "Whatever we find tonight," I said as Odie parked 2 blocks away from Dad's house, "whatever the truth turns out to be, I'm glad I'm not facing it alone." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "That's what family does, sweetheart." "The family you choose anyway." We walked through the shadows toward the house where I'd grown up, toward secrets that had been buried for 7 years, toward a truth that someone had been willing to kill to keep hidden. But for the first time since I'd learned of Dad's death, I felt like I was moving towards something instead of running away from it. The key in my pocket seemed to pulse with warmth, as if Mom's love was reaching across the years to guide me home. The house loomed against the star-scattered sky like a sleeping giant, its familiar silhouette both comforting and ominous in the darkness. Odie and I crouched behind the Talbots' garden shed, watching for signs of life in the windows. Most of the neighborhood was dark except for the glow of porch lights and the occasional flicker of late-night television screens. "Dolores' car isn't in the driveway," I whispered, checking my phone for the 3rd time. Nearly 11 o'clock, well into Finn's grandmother's patrol shift. "Good. Makes this easier." Odie adjusted the straps of her backpack. "How are we getting in?" I pulled out the house key I'd never returned when I moved out. "Front door." I'm hoping Delora was too focused on locking down the study to think about changing the main locks. We waited another 10 minutes, watching for any movement, any sign that we'd been spotted. The October night was crisp but not cold, and the air carried the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and fell silent. "Now," I said. We moved quickly across the Talbots' backyard, slipped through the hedge that separated our properties, and approached the back door. My heart hammered against my ribs as I slid the key into the lock, certain that after 2 years, Delora would have had the locks changed. But the key turned smoothly and the door opened with only the softest whisper of hinges that Dad had always kept. Meticulously oiled, the kitchen was dark except for the green glow of the microwave clock. Everything looked exactly as it had that. Afternoon sterile and personal, scrubbed of all traces of the family that had lived here for 15 years. We moved through the shadows toward the front of the house, our footsteps muffled by the thick carpeting Delora had installed over Mom's original hardwood floors. The study door stood at the end of the hallway like a guardian, its new deadbolt gleaming in the faint light from the street. But I wasn't interested in forcing my way through Delora's barriers, not yet. First, I needed to find what Mom had hidden all those years ago. "Where do we start?" Odie whispered, pulling a small LED flashlight from her pack. I thought about Mom's personality, her habits, the way she'd approached the world with equal measures of romance and practicality. She'd loved hiding little surprises for Dad and me notes. In lunchboxes, small gifts tucked into unexpected places, treasures waiting to be discovered. But where would she hide an entire collection of love letters? "Her bedroom," I said finally, or what used to be her bedroom. We climbed the stairs carefully, avoiding the 7th step that had always creaked like a banshee. The master bedroom had been completely redecorated, of course. Gone were Mom's antique furniture and her collection of vintage jewelry boxes. Instead, the room looked like a hotel suite, modern, expensive, and utterly without personality. "The closet," I said, remembering something. Mom had a secret compartment in the back of her closet. She showed it to me once when I was little, said it was where she kept things that were too precious for ordinary hiding places. But when we opened the closet door, we found only Delora's designer clothes hanging in perfect rows. The back wall had been refinished, any traces of Mom's hiding place erased along with everything else. "Think," I muttered to myself. "Where else would she put them?" I closed my eyes and tried to remember Mom's habits, her favorite spots in the house. She'd love the window seat in the living room where she'd sit with her morning coffee and watch the sunrise. She'd spent hours in the kitchen, not just cooking but writing grocery lists, letters to friends, notes in the margins of her recipe books. Recipe books. The kitchen, I said suddenly. Mom's recipe collection. We hurried back downstairs and I went straight to the cabinet where Mom had kept her cookbook collection. But the shelves held only a few generic cooking magazines and a couple of contemporary cookbooks I didn't recognize. Delora threw them away, I said, feeling despair settle in my chest. She got rid of everything. Odie was examining the cabinet more closely, running her hands along the shelves. Look at this. She pointed to the back corner of the bottom shelf, where the wood looked slightly different from the rest. With gentle pressure, a small panel shifted, revealing a narrow space behind the false back. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with a faded blue ribbon, was a thick bundle of papers. My hands shook as I untied the ribbon and unfolded the oilcloth, to reveal dozens of letters in Dad's distinctive handwriting, along with what looked like official documents and several small photographs. The top letter was dated just 3 months after my parents' wedding, and it was addressed to my beloved Helena in Dad's younger, more confident script. She kept them all, I whispered, touching the papers reverently. Every single letter he ever wrote to her. But as I rifled through the collection by flashlight, I realized there was more here than just love letters. Mixed in with Dad's romantic correspondence were legal documents, insurance papers, property deeds, and what looked like a will dated 5 years before Dad's death. Odie, I said urgently, look at this. I held up the will, scanning its contents. Quickly. According to this document, Dad had left the house and most of his assets to Delora, but he also established a trust for me that included Mom's jewelry, her personal effects, and a substantial amount of money that was supposed to be held in a separate account until my 21st birthday. There's a second will, Odie breathed, reading over my shoulder. This isn't the one Delora probated. Look at the date on this one. I pointed to the signature page. This was executed 6 months after Dad married Delora, which means ... Which means it supersedes whatever will was filed after his death. Odie's voice was grim. Eska, this changes everything. If this will is valid, you're entitled to a significant inheritance that Delora has been hiding from you. I thought about the key Mabel had given me, still heavy in my pocket. But why hide it here? Why not file it with his attorney? As if in answer to my question, I found another document at the bottom of the stack, a letter from Dad to Mom, dated just 2 years before her death. In it, he mentioned meeting with a lawyer about updating their wills to protect my inheritance, in case anything happens to both of us, and his decision to keep copies of all important documents in Helena's safe place, rather than trusting everything to lawyers who might not have our daughter's best interests at heart. He was protecting me, I realized. Even before Mom died, he was thinking about how to make sure I'd be taken care of. But there was something else in the bundle that made my blood run cold, a series of letters between Dad and what appeared to be a private investigator dated just 6 months before Dad's death. The investigator had been looking into Delora's background and had discovered some disturbing information about her previous marriage. Her first husband, a wealthy art dealer from Boston, had died suddenly of what was ruled accidental poisoning from contaminated shellfish. Delora had inherited his entire estate, which she'd used to fund her gallery and her lifestyle. Oh my God, I whispered. She's done this before. The sound of a car door slamming outside sent ice through my veins. Through the kitchen window, I could see headlights in the driveway. Delora was home. Go, Odie hissed, shoving the documents back into the oilcloth. Take these and get out the back door. What about the secret room? The key? Later, right now we need to leave before she finds us here. I grabbed the bundle of papers and we ran for the back door, but we could already hear Delora's key in the front lock. We slipped outside just as the porch light came on, and we crouched behind the garden shed as footsteps moved through the house. My heart was pounding so hard. I was sure Delora would hear it from inside. In my hands, I clutched the evidence that could change everything, proof that my father had never intended to cut me out of his life, that my inheritance had been deliberately hidden, and that the woman who'd driven me away might be a murderer. As we waited in the darkness for our chance to escape, I realized that having the truth was only the beginning. Now I had to figure out how to use it without ending up like Dad, silenced before I could expose what Delora had done. The key in my pocket felt heavier than ever, and I knew that whatever Mom had hidden in that secret room might be the final piece of the puzzle. But first, I had to live long enough to find it. We made it back to the bed and breakfast just after midnight. Adrenaline still coursing through our systems like electricity. I spread the documents across my bed while Odie made coffee with the little machine in her room, and we spent the next 3 hours piecing together a story that grew more disturbing with each revelation. The private investigator's report painted a picture of Delora March as a woman who made a career of marrying vulnerable widowers and inheriting their assets. Her first husband, Charles March, had died of what the medical examiner had ruled accidental food poisoning, but the investigator had found inconsistencies in the timeline and witness statements that suggested a more sinister explanation. Charles had been in perfect health, had no known allergies, and had eaten the same meal as several other people who'd suffered no ill effects. Look at this, I said, pointing to a highlighted passage in the report. Charles had updated his will. Just 3 months before his death, leaving everything to Delora. And here she'd taken out a life insurance policy on him worth $2 million, citing his risky lifestyle as a reason for the high coverage. Risky lifestyle? Odie looked up from the coffee she was brewing. What was risky about being an art dealer? According to this, nothing. Charles March was described by friends as cautious, health-conscious, and risk-averse. He ate organic food, exercised regularly, and had never even gotten a speeding ticket. I flipped to another page, but somehow Delora convinced an insurance company that he needed extensive life insurance because he was prone to adventurous dining and impulsive travel. Adventurous dining, Odie repeated grimly. That's one way to describe being poisoned. The parallels to Dad's situation were impossible to ignore. According to the investigator's notes, Dad had started experiencing digestive issues and unexplained fatigue. Shortly after, Delora had convinced him to switch doctors and begin seeing a specialist she'd recommended in Boston. The same specialist, it turned out, who had treated Charles March in the months before his death. She's been planning this for years, I said, feeling sick. The whole thing, the marriage, the gradual isolation from friends and family, the mysterious health problems, even getting rid of people like Mabel who might ask inconvenient questions. But it was the financial documents that revealed the true scope of Delora's deception. According to the will hidden in Mom's secret compartment, Dad had established a trust fund for me worth nearly $500,000, money that was supposed to be held in a separate account and managed by an independent trustee until my 21st birthday. The account statements showed regular contributions over the years since Mom's death, building a substantial nest egg that was intended to pay for my education and provide financial security as I started my adult life. None of this had been mentioned in the will that Delora had filed for probate. She's stolen your entire inheritance, Odie said, studying the bank statements. Not just hidden it, actively diverted it into accounts she controls. But how is that legal? Wouldn't the bank require documentation? Look at this. Odie handed me another document, a power of attorney form signed by Dad, giving Delora authority to manage all financial accounts in case of his incapacitation. If she convinced a doctor to declare your father mentally incompetent due to his illness, she could have moved money around with impunity. I thought about Dad's letters to me over the past 2 years, his handwriting growing slightly shakier, but his mind remaining sharp and engaged. He'd written about books he was reading, questions about my college classes, memories of Mom that he wanted to share with me. Nothing in those letters suggested cognitive decline or mental incapacitation. She drugged him, I said with sudden certainty. Just enough to make him seem confused or forgetful when it mattered, but not enough to kill him quickly. She needed time to manipulate the legal documents and move the money. And when he started getting suspicious and hiring investigators, Odie added, she escalated to a more permanent solution. I picked up the key Mabel had given me, turning it over in my palm. Whatever Mom had hidden in that secret room, whatever Dad had wanted me to find, it had to be connected to all of this. Maybe additional evidence, maybe backup documents, maybe something that could prove Delora's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. We need to get back into that house, I said. Tonight was just the beginning. Sweetheart, if Delora is really a murderer, going back there could be incredibly dangerous. Maybe we should take what we have to the police. I considered that option, but something held me back. With what proof? A will that was hidden in a secret compartment. The word of a 19-year-old girl against a respected widow? And even if they believed us, Dolores had 2 years to cover her tracks and move money around. She might have already destroyed any evidence that could convict her. So, what do you want to do? I stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the quiet street where normal people were sleeping peacefully in their beds, unaware that somewhere nearby a woman was getting away with murder. The eastern sky was beginning to show the faintest hint of dawn, and I realized we'd been awake all night. I want to finish what Dad started, I said finally. I want to find whatever he hid in that secret room. And then I want to make Delora pay for what she's done. Odie was quiet for a long moment. And if she tries to stop you, then I guess we'll find out just how far she's willing to go to protect her secrets. As the sun rose over Elmsbrook, painting the Victorian houses in shades of gold and pink, I felt something shift inside me. For 2 years, I've been living as a victim of Delora's manipulation, accepting her version of events, believing that I'd somehow deserved to be cut out of my father's life. But now I understood that I hadn't been rejected, I'd been targeted. My grief and confusion hadn't been natural consequences of family dysfunction. They'd been carefully orchestrated by a woman who'd seen me as an obstacle to be removed. That knowledge was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. I wasn't a failed daughter or an unwanted stepdaughter. I was simply someone who'd stood between a predator and her prey. And now that I understood the game, I could finally start playing to win. We're going to need help, I said, turning back to Odie. People we can trust. People who knew Dad well enough to vouch for his character and his intentions. I can think of a few possibilities. What do you have in mind? I smiled, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, it felt genuine. I'm thinking it's time for Delora to discover that she's not the only one who knows how to plan a few moves ahead. By 8 o'clock that morning, I'd assembled what Odie jokingly called my team of co-conspirators in the coffee shop across from the Historical Society. Finn sat at our corner table looking like he'd barely slept. Mabel clutched a cup of tea. with hands that trembled slightly from age and excitement, and Odie spread sugar packets on the table with the methodical precision of someone plotting military strategy. "So let me make sure I understand this correctly," Finn said after I'd filled him in on our midnight discoveries. "Delora is probably a serial killer who's been slowly poisoning your father while systematically stealing your inheritance." "That's the theory," I confirmed. "And we think whatever Dad hid in the secret room will give us proof we can take to the authorities. The question is how to get to it without ending up like Theodore," Mabel said grimly. "That woman didn't hesitate to eliminate one obstacle. She won't hesitate to eliminate more." I pulled out my phone and showed them the photos I'd taken of the house yesterday. The new deadbolt on the study door is serious hardware, professional grade. She's not just trying to keep out casual intruders, she's protecting something specific. Or someone specific? Odie added meaningfully. Finn studied the photos carefully. "You know, there might be another way to access that hidden room. According to the building survey, the secret chamber shares a wall with the basement storage area. If we could get down there..." "The basement has a separate entrance," I said suddenly, remembering lazy summer afternoons when Dad and I had worked on his various research projects in his downstairs office. "There's a door that opens directly onto the backyard. We used to use it to haul boxes of documents in and out. Is it locked?" Mabel asked. "It was always locked, but Dad kept the key hidden under a fake rock by the foundation. Old habits die hard, and he was forever locking himself out when he was carrying files and couldn't manage his regular keys." Finn grinned. "So we go in through the basement, locate the shared wall, and see if we can access the hidden chamber from below." "What about Delora?" "Today's Wednesday," Mabel said thoughtfully. "Delora has that weekly gallery board meeting in Boston every Wednesday. Drives down in the morning, doesn't usually get back until late afternoon." I felt a surge of hope. "You're sure?" "Honey, I kept house for your family for 32 years. I know that woman's schedule better than she does." Mabel's eyes glinted with something that looked suspiciously like anticipation. "And I still have my key to the basement door. Your father gave it to me years ago for emergencies, and I never returned it." "You kept a key to our house for 2 years?" "I kept a key to your house, dear." Theodore was clear about that distinction. She reached into her purse and produced a brass key identical to the one I'd never returned. "He said family should always have a way home." For a moment, I felt the full weight of Dad's love and his regrets. Even in his weakness, even when he couldn't protect me from Delora's manipulations, he'd been thinking ahead, making sure I'd have allies and access if I ever needed them. "What time does she usually leave for Boston?" I asked. "Around 9:30. Takes her about an hour and a half to get there, depending on traffic." I checked my phone. 8:15. That gives us a little over an hour to plan this properly. We spent the next 45 minutes working out the details. Finn would position himself at the Historical Society, where he had a clear view of Maple Street and could warn us if Delora returned unexpectedly. Odie would wait in the car with the engine running, ready for a quick escape if necessary. Mabel and I would enter through the basement and search for the hidden chamber. "What if you don't find anything?" Finn asked as we prepared to leave the coffee shop. "Then we take what we have to the police and hope it's enough," I said. But I think Dad was too careful and too smart to leave loose ends. If he told me to look for a box beneath his desk, and if that box isn't in the study, then it's in the only other place it could be, the hidden room. At 9:45, we watched from Finn's office window as Delora's BMW pulled out of the driveway and headed toward the highway. She looked composed and professional in her tailored suit, every inch of the successful gallery owner attending an important business meeting. No one looking at her would suspect that she built her entire lifestyle on The systematic murder of lonely widowers. All clear, Finn confirmed, and Mabel and I made our way carefully through the neighborhood to the backyard of my childhood home. The fake rock was still there, wedged between the foundation stones exactly where Dad had always kept it. Inside, the key waited like a small miracle of continuity in a world that had been turned upside down. The basement smelled like concrete and old books, exactly as I remembered. Dad's makeshift office occupied one corner, his research materials still stacked neatly on the folding table where he'd worked on his academic papers. Along the far wall, filing cabinets and storage boxes created a maze of family history that no one but Dad had ever bothered to organize. The hidden chamber should be behind this wall, I said, consulting the building survey Finn had copied for me. Somewhere around here. We spent 20 minutes feeling along the concrete blocks, looking for any sign of a hidden panel or access point. The wall seemed solid and unbroken, and I was beginning to wonder if the survey had been wrong when Mabel called softly from behind a stack of boxes. "Eska, dear, come look at this." She'd moved several storage containers away from the wall and discovered what looked like a small wooden door, no more than 3 feet high, built into the foundation. It was painted to match the concrete and nearly invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. "That's it," I breathed. "That has to be it." The door was secured with an old-fashioned padlock, but when I pulled out the key Mabel had given me, it fit perfectly. The lock opened with a satisfying click, and the door swung inward to reveal a narrow, low-ceilinged chamber that extended back into the darkness. I crawled inside with my flashlight, Mabel following close behind. The space was larger than I'd expected, maybe 6 feet deep and 4 feet wide, with enough headroom to sit upright if you didn't mind the cobwebs. And there, nestled against the back wall like a treasure waiting to be discovered, was a metal filing box with a combination lock. "Found it," I called softly. The combination lock had 4 digits, and I tried several possibilities before hitting on the right one: Mom's birthday. The date that Dad had never forgotten to celebrate even after. She was gone. The box opened to reveal manila folders stuffed with documents, several USB drives, and what looked like a digital voice recorder. "Oh my God," I whispered, reading the labels on the folders. "Mabel, look at this." One folder was labeled Insurance. Policies original versus amended, another financial records, Helena's trust, and a third medical documentation inconsistencies. But it was the 4th folder that made my hand shake. Delora March background investigation complete report. "Your father was documenting everything," Mabel said with satisfaction. "Building a case." I grabbed the voice recorder and hit play. Dad's voice filled the tiny chamber, clear and strong despite the tinny quality of the device. "This is Theodore Rowanvale, and today is September 15th. If someone is listening to this recording, it probably means I'm dead, and Delora has succeeded in her plan. I want to state clearly and for the record that I am of sound mind and body as I make this recording, and that I believe my wife Delora March Rowanvale is systematically poisoning me with the intent to inherit my estate and steal the inheritance. That rightfully belongs to my daughter." The recording continued for nearly an hour, detailing Dad's growing suspicions about his illness, his investigation into Delora's background, and his efforts to protect my inheritance. He'd been meticulous in his documentation, recording dates, symptoms, and his observations about Delora's behavior. Most damning of all, he'd secretly recorded several conversations with Delora in which she'd revealed details about her first husband's death that contradicted the official story. "This is it," I said, gathering up the files and USB drives. "This is everything we need to prove what she did." But as we prepared to leave the hidden chamber, I heard something that made my blood freeze. The sound of a car door slamming in the driveway above us. Delora was home. "She's early," Mabel whispered, her face pale in the flashlight beam. "The meeting must have been canceled." We could hear footsteps moving through the house above us, and I realized with growing panic that we were trapped. The basement door was our only exit, but it opened directly onto the backyard where Delora would see us immediately. The interior stairs led up to the kitchen, but that would put us right in her path. Turn off the flashlight, I hissed, plunging us into absolute darkness. We huddled in the hidden chamber, listening to the sounds of Delora moving around upstairs. Doors opened and closed, footsteps moved from room to room, and then everything went quiet for several long minutes. Maybe she went to her room to change clothes. Mabel breathed almost inaudibly, but then we heard something that made my heart stop. The basement door opening at the top of the stairs. Lights spilled down from the kitchen, and Delora's voice called out with false sweetness, "Aska? I know you're down there, dear." Finn Talbot called to warn me about suspicious activity in the neighborhood. Such a thoughtful young man. I closed my eyes in despair. Finn had betrayed us. All this time, he'd been working with Delora, feeding her information, helping her stay. One step ahead. I thought about his easy access to historical records, his knowledge of my movements, his helpful suggestions about how to break into the house. He'd been the perfect inside source. "There's no point hiding," Delora continued, her footsteps beginning to descend the wooden stairs. "I've already called the police about the break-in. They should be here shortly." But something in her tone suggested she was bluffing. If she really called the police, why come down alone? Why not wait for them to arrive? The answer hit me like a physical blow, because she couldn't afford to have the police find what we discovered. The evidence in Dad's hidden files would destroy her completely, and she knew it. She was down here to eliminate witnesses and clean up loose ends, just as she'd done with Dad. "I have to say I'm impressed," Delora said, and I could see the beam of her flashlight playing across the storage boxes. "Theodore always said you were clever, but I didn't realize how persistent you could be. It's really quite admirable." I gripped the metal filing box tighter, knowing it contained the only proof that could bring her to justice. If she destroyed these files, she'd gotten away with murder twice, and she'd probably do it again. "You know, your father was persistent too, at the end," Delora continued conversationally. "Always asking questions, always poking around in things. That didn't concern him. He actually hired a private investigator to look into my background. Can you imagine? After everything I'd done for him, all the care I provided during his illness. She was close now, maybe 10 feet from our hiding spot. I could hear her moving boxes, searching systematically for our location. The investigator found some interesting information about my first husband's death," she went on. "Completely circumstantial, of course, but Theodore became quite paranoid about it. Started refusing his medications, claiming I was trying to hurt him. It was really very sad to watch." Mabel's hand found mine in the darkness and squeezed tight. We both understood what was happening. Delora was confessing because she planned to kill us. Dead witnesses couldn't testify about what they'd overheard. The amusing thing is that Charles, my first husband, really did die from bad shellfish. I had nothing to do with it, but the way he went gave me ideas for dealing with Theodore's inconvenient suspicions. I could hear the smile in her voice. Arsenic is so much more reliable than bacterial contamination, and it mimics the symptoms of digestive illness beautifully. She'd found the hidden door. I could see her flashlight beam playing across the opening, and I knew we had maybe seconds before she discovered us inside. "Eska, dear, I know you can hear me. Why don't you come out and we can discuss this like civilized people? I'm sure we can reach some kind of understanding." I made a decision that probably saved our lives. Instead of waiting to be discovered, I crawled quickly out of the chamber with the filing box clutched to my chest. "Hello, Delora," I said, standing up in the basement with as much dignity as I could muster. "You're absolutely right. We should talk." She stood at the bottom of the stairs, impeccably dressed despite having just driven back from Boston, her flashlight trained on me like a weapon. In her free hand, she held something that glinted in the light, a kitchen knife, the same one she probably used to prepare Dad's final meal. "You've been very busy," she said, her eyes fixed on the box I was holding. "I hope you found what you were looking for. I think you know what I found. Theodore's little insurance policy, yes. He was so proud of his clever hiding place." She took a step closer. If you'd simply accepted the situation and moved on with your life, none of this would have been necessary. But you couldn't leave well enough alone, could you? Well enough alone. I felt anger rising in my chest, hot and pure. You murdered my father and stole my inheritance. You drove me away from the only family I had left. What exactly was I supposed to accept? Your father's death was a mercy, she said coldly. He was weak, pathetic, drowning in grief for a woman who'd been dead for 7 years. I gave his life meaning, purpose, dignity. And in return, I deserved to inherit what he built. What about my mother's trust fund? The money Dad set aside for my education. Delora laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Your education? Darling, you're studying literature at a mediocre state college. Do you really think you deserve $500,000 to finance that particular form of self-indulgence? Behind me, I could hear Mabel moving carefully in the shadows, but I didn't dare take my eyes off Delora to see what she was doing. The money wasn't yours to take, I said. Wasn't it? I was Theodore's wife. I cared for him during his illness. I managed his household. I gave him companionship in his final years. What did you give him besides guilt and painful reminders of the past? I gave him love, I said simply. And he loved me enough to document what you were doing to him. Love. She practically spat the word. Love doesn't pay for medical bills or maintain a household or provide security in old age. Love is a luxury for people who don't understand how the world really works. She raised the knife slightly and I realized we'd reached the end of our conversation. Whatever happened next would determine whether justice was served or whether Delora walked away from another murder. But before either of us could move, the basement was suddenly flooded with light from the top of the stairs, and a voice called down, "Police! Everyone stay exactly where you are." Delora spun toward the stairs, momentarily off balance, and that was all the opportunity I needed. I dove behind a stack of storage boxes, just as Mabel emerged from the shadows behind Delora and tackled her. With surprising force for a woman in her 70s, the knife clattered across the concrete floor as both women went down in a tangle of limbs. I scrambled toward the weapon, but Delora was already fighting her way free from Mabel's grip. "Stop!" The voice from upstairs was closer now, and I could hear multiple sets of footsteps on the wooden steps. Delora looked wildly between me, Mabel, and the approaching police officers. For a moment, I thought she might surrender. Then her expression hardened into something desperate and calculating. She attacked me. She cried out as the first officer reached the bottom of the stairs. Both of them. They broke into my house and assaulted me when I discovered them stealing from my husband's estate. But the lead officer, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and intelligent eyes, looked around the scene with professional assessment. She noted the hidden chamber, the scattered files, and the knife on the floor. "Ma'am," she said to Delora in a tone that suggested she'd heard it all before, "why don't we start with everyone putting their hands where I can see them, and then we'll sort out who did what to whom." As I raised my hands, the filing box still clutched against my chest, I caught sight of a familiar figure at the top of the stairs. Finn stood in the kitchen doorway, but he wasn't wearing the expression of someone who'd betrayed us. Instead, he looked relieved and triumphant. The recording device worked perfectly. He called down to the officers. "We got the whole confession." I stared at him in confusion until understanding dawned. He hadn't betrayed us to Delora, he'd set her up. The phone call warning her about suspicious activity had been designed to bring her back early, when we'd be positioned to record her confession. "You son of a bitch," Delora breathed, finally understanding that she'd been outmaneuvered. "Ma'am," the lead officer said firmly, "you have the right to remain silent, ... As they read Delora her rights and led her up the stairs in handcuffs, I felt something shift inside me that I couldn't quite name. It wasn't relief, exactly, or even satisfaction. It was more like a door opening after being locked for a very long time, letting light back into spaces that had been dark for too long. Dad was still gone. Mom was still gone. The years of manipulation and stolen grief couldn't be undone. But the truth was finally free, and that had to count for something. 3 months later, I stood in the doorway of Dad's study, which no longer felt like enemy territory. The deadbolt was gone, the room was full of afternoon sunshine, and I was finally free to grieve in the space where he'd spent so many hours thinking about me. The legal proceedings had moved faster than anyone expected. Dolores' confession, recorded on the wire Finn had convinced me to wear, combined with Dad's meticulously documented evidence, had built an airtight case for both murder and fraud. She plea bargained to avoid the death penalty, accepting life in prison without the possibility of parole. The money she'd stolen from my trust fund had been recovered and returned, along with Mom's jewelry and other personal effects that Delora had hidden away. But more importantly, I'd gotten my father back. Not literally, of course. The grave in Hillside Cemetery beneath the dogwood trees was real and final, and nothing could change that. But I'd reclaimed his memory from Dolores' distorted narrative. The letters he'd written to me, the secret recordings, the elaborate plan he constructed to protect my inheritance, all of it proved that he'd never stopped being my father, never stopped loving me, never stopped fighting for me, even when he was too weak to do it openly. "The movers will be here at 2. Odie called from the hallway. "Are you almost ready?" I was donating the house to the Historical Society, where Finn was developing a museum focused on local family histories. It seemed fitting that a place where so many secrets had been buried should become a space dedicated to preserving and sharing. The truth about ordinary lives. My inheritance was enough to finish college without working 3 jobs, maybe even enough to pursue graduate school if I wanted. But more valuable than the money was the sense of belonging I'd recovered. I wasn't an unwanted stepdaughter or a grieving orphan. I was Helena and Theodore Rowanvale's beloved daughter, heir to their love story and their family legacy. I picked up the last box from Dad's desk, his collection of fountain pens and the leather journal where he'd drafted his letters to me. On the final page, he'd written something I'd only discovered the week before. "For Eska, who has her mother's heart and her grandfather's stubborn streak. May she always fight for what's hers and never accept anyone else's version of who she's supposed to be." Ready. I called back to ODIE as we loaded the final boxes into her car. Finn appeared from next door carrying a plate of his grandmother's cookies and wearing the kind of smile that suggested good news. The Historical Society board approved. "The memorial garden," he said. "We're going to plant it where Dolores' geometric shrubs are now. Wildflowers, just like your mother grew." "She would have loved that," I said, accepting a cookie that tasted like childhood and second chances. "There's something else." He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "This came for you today, forwarded from your old address." The envelope was thick, expensive, with my name written in elegant script across the front. Inside was a letter from the curator of a prestigious literary archive, along with what looked like a substantial check. "Dear Miss Rowanvale," I read aloud. "We recently acquired the papers of Dr. Marcus Henley, the noted historian, and discovered among them extensive correspondence with your father regarding his research into local family histories, Dr. Henley's. Notes indicate that your father was working on a book about the hidden stories of small-town New England families, using his own family's experiences as a central case study. We would be honored to offer you a research fellowship to complete his work." I stared at the letter, feeling pieces of my future clicking into place like tumblers in a lock. Dad's academic work, his careful documentation of family secrets, his belief in the importance of preserving true stories. It had all been leading to something larger than I'd realized. "A research fellowship?" Odie asked, reading over my shoulder. "Eska, that's wonderful." "It means I could finish what he started," I said slowly. "Turn his research into the book he never got to write." "And it means you'd be carrying on both your parents' legacies," Finn added. "Your mother's love of stories and your father's commitment to historical truth." I looked back at the house one more time, no longer seeing the place where I'd been betrayed and driven away, but the place where I'd learned that love could survive death, that truth could survive deception, and that sometimes the best way to honor the past was to refuse to let anyone else define it for you. 6 months ago, I'd been a grieving daughter locked out of her father's funeral, carrying the weight of feeling unwanted and erased. Now I was a young woman with a future worth fighting for, a family legacy to preserve, and a story to tell that would make sure no one forgot the names Helena and Theodore Rowanvale Dot as I drove away from Maple Street for the last time. I thought about the key Mabel had given me, the key that had unlocked not just a hidden chamber, but a hidden truth about who I was and where I belonged. Sometimes the most important inheritances aren't money or property. Sometimes they're the courage to reclaim your own story and the knowledge that love really can reach across time to guide you home. The dogwood trees and Hillside Cemetery were beginning to bud, getting ready to bloom again after their long winter sleep. Soon they'd be covered with pink and white flowers, creating a canopy of beauty over the place where my parents rested. And when they bloomed, I'd be there to see them, no longer as someone who'd been excluded from our own family story, but as someone who'd fought to preserve it. That was my real inheritance, not money or property, or even the satisfaction of seeing justice done, but the knowledge that I was exactly who my parents had raised me to be, someone who wouldn't give up, who wouldn't accept anyone else's version of the truth, and who would always fight to come home. Elmsbrook in late October feels like an old photograph that someone has forgotten to put away. The air sharpens under a sky the color of pewter, and the dogwoods behind Hillside Cemetery are stripped bare, their twisted limbs black against morning frost. I hadn't planned to come back so soon, but some things have a pull stronger than reason. It's been 3 months since Delora was let out of my father's house in handcuffs, her mask of calm elegance shattered. 3 months since I stood in the study I once wasn't allowed to enter, listening to the echo of his voice on the recorder. He'd hidden, telling the truth he'd been too afraid or too sick to say aloud. Now, stepping across the threshold again, I notice how the dust settles differently without secrets to stir it. The air feels lighter somehow, though the shadows remain. Grief doesn't disappear just because justice arrives. It lingers in corners, threads itself through floorboards and drifts from room to room like smoke. I'm not here to settle scores anymore. Those are mostly settled, or at least as settled as they ever will be. The courts gave Delora what she deserved, a life behind bars. The prosecutors called it justice. The papers called it scandal. But in the quiet spaces left behind, what I felt was not triumph, but a kind of fragile relief and exhaustion so deep it seeped into my bones. I walked slowly through the house, my footsteps soft against the worn wood of the hallway. In the kitchen, morning light catches the edge of the marble counters Delora had installed, making them look strangely cold like frozen water. I remember Mom's battered oak table that used to stand in the same spot. Even now I catch myself expecting to see her there, her hair in its loose braid, a cup of tea steaming gently in front of her Dot. The walls are bare in places where Delora's art once hung. The movers took her pieces away, each painting wrapped carefully, labeled and stacked for evidence. What remains are nail holes and pale outlines on faded paint, a record of what was once displayed here, and of what was hidden behind it. Dot and Dad's study, the air is different. The room feels like it's breathing again, as if someone has thrown open a window after years of still quiet. His books, returned from the evidence room, are lined up neatly on the shelves, titles worn, spines cracked by decades of use. His leather armchair sits near the fireplace, its seat shaped by his absent weight. On the desk is a single object, the small oak box I found in the hidden room, the one he told me to look for in his last letter. My fingers brush the lid before I open it, as though asking permission. Inside, the contents are simple: a fountain pen worn smooth by his grip, a photograph of Mom smiling under summer sun, her hair wind-tossed, eyes bright, and a folded note in Dad's hand. Eska. It reads, "If you're reading this, it means I've failed to say what I should have." Said aloud, "I'm sorry. I never stopped loving you. I never stopped being proud of you. Some truths weigh too much to carry to the grave, so I've left them here for you to find when I no longer can stand beside you to speak them. Love, always, Dad." The words land like a stone in water ripples, spreading through memory, through guilt, through a childhood shadowed by silence. I sit in the leather chair and hold the photograph until my breathing steadies, feeling the ache of loss loosen its grip, if only by a fraction. Outside the study window, the branches move in the wind, shadows crawling slowly across the desk. In the quiet, I remember the stories Dad used to tell me, family histories, whispered legends, the names of ancestors etched into gravestones at Hillside Cemetery. He'd believe so fiercely in the power of memory, of not letting the past slip. Away into dust. Now it's my turn to remember. Later, I walk the familiar path to the cemetery. The dogwoods stand silent above Dad's grave, branches bare but already holding the promise of spring buds. I place my hand on the cold stone, tracing the letters of his name. My breath ghosts in the air, a brief, fading thing. I found it. Dad, I say softly, everything you wanted me to see. And I'm going to tell the whole story, all of it. A breeze lifts the hair from my face, stirring dry leaves across the ground. I stand there until the morning turns to afternoon, until the sun slips west and shadows grow long. Then I turn back toward town, my steps lighter than when I arrived. There's more to say, more to uncover. But for the first time in years, I feel like I'm not walking alone, not entirely. The truth, once buried, is finally breathing free. Beside me, some days it still feels unreal how close I came to believing Dolores' story instead of Dad's. How easily guilt can masquerade as truth when whispered by someone who knows where your wounds lie. But Dad's letters, hidden in dusty corners and secret rooms, did more than prove what happened. They stitched a bridge back to the girl I'd been before loss taught me silence. Back in my Vermont dorm, the letters sit in a carved cedar box on the windowsill. At first, I couldn't bring myself to read them all at once. They felt too raw, too alive. I'd pull one out late at night when the campus was quiet, the shadows soft against the walls, and let his words find me. Some letters were mundane updates on the weather in Elmsbrook, small town gossip, book recommendations scribbled in the margins. Others were tender confessions, pieces of himself he'd hidden from everyone, but me. In one, he described the first. Time he saw my mother, standing under the dogwoods in spring, pink petals tangled in her hair. She looked like the season itself, he wrote, wild and gentle all at once. And I knew, without knowing why, that my life would never be the same. Those words undid me more than any confession of guilt or regret. They reminded me that I came from love as stubborn as it was imperfect. That even if Delora had tried to uproot every trace of that love, it had survived in letters and memories. In the quiet corners of an old house. In the afternoons, between classes, I sit by the window and copy passages into a notebook, my handwriting, curling around his. It feels like stitching our voices together across time, binding father and daughter not just by blood but by story. Each letter is an answer to questions I didn't know how to ask. Did you still love me? Did you fight for me? Did you remember who I was? And in every ink-stained line, the answer is yes. I've also begun sorting through the research Dad left behind. Pages of family histories, maps dotted with annotations, faded photographs labeled in his looping script. His study had been more than a refuge. It had been a workshop where he tried to capture what memory leaves behind. And now it feels like a workshop for me too. Some evenings, I sit there long after the campus quiets, tracing my finger over a photograph of my mother, her smile, so familiar it hurts. I let myself remember her laugh, the way she'd hum to. Herself in the kitchen, the smell of soap and rosemary that clung to her sweaters. Those memories used to cut like glass. Now they feel softer, as if grief has finally sanded the edges. But it's not just about looking back. The past is only alive if we carry it forward. That realization came slowly, like dawn creeping through a shuttered window. Remembering isn't enough. We have to tell the stories too. A month ago, I sent a proposal to a small New England press. A book about family legacies, about the truths we bury and the cost of unearthing them. I didn't know if they'd care about the story of a quiet historian, his stubborn daughter, and the woman who tried to erase them both, But the editor's reply was gentle, curious. "It's a brave story, Eska. We'd love to see more." For the first time, it felt like my voice mattered, not as a daughter seeking proof of love, but as someone who had a story to tell. A story about survival, memory, and how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to let go of the truth. Odie has been my anchor through all of this. She still calls every Sunday, her voice warm with the unshakable steadiness that saved me more times than I can count. She sends care packages, 2 lavender sachets, homemade biscotti, and once a slim leather notebook embossed with my initials. "For your words," she wrote on the card, "because your voice deserves to be heard." Sometimes, when the past feels too heavy, I drive back to Brattleboro to see her. We sit in the back room of her bookshop, sunlight slanting through the dusty windows, and she listens without rushing to patch my silences. It's strange how family can be chosen as well as inherited. How love can grow in places where blood alone couldn't plant it. And then there's Finn. His betrayal had been a ruse, a carefully planned risk to draw Delora into revealing the truth. At first, I couldn't look at him without remembering the basement, the knife glinting in Delora's hand, the sound of Dad's confession playing from the recorder in my pocket. But slowly we found a quieter space together. His guilt is real, but so is his relief that it worked. Sometimes we talk late into the night about what it means to keep secrets for the right reasons and how easily that line can blur. Other times, we don't talk at all. We sit on the porch of the Historical Society building, the same one where Dad and I spent quiet afternoons, and watch the dogwoods across the street whisper in the wind. I've begun to see my father differently, too. Not as a man who failed me, but as a man who fought in the only ways he knew, through words, through hidden records, through stubborn hope. His love wasn't perfect, but it was there, growing stubbornly like the wildflowers my mother once planted, resilient, even when the garden was torn apart. And in those letters, in those small, inked confessions, he left me something more lasting than any inheritance: the courage to keep asking questions, and the faith that truth, however painful, is always worth finding. When I was younger, I thought family was something fixed written in birth certificates, bound by wedding rings and shared last names. Now, older and maybe just a little wiser, I know it's something we build and rebuild. Sometimes from Revel Dot and Elmsbrook, traces of my family remain like ghost handwriting, faint but still legible. The wildflowers have returned to Dad's old garden. Finn and the volunteers from the Historical Society cleared away Delora's clipped hedges, planting seeds that slept under the soil all along. When they bloomed this spring scrappy blues, golds and whites, they looked nothing like Delora's geometric shrubs. They looked like something alive, stubborn, and a little unruly. Like memory itself. Standing there one morning, I realized the garden was never really gone. It had been, waiting quietly for someone to remember. The same could be said for so many things. Dad's research notes, scattered across file boxes and old hard drives, held the beginnings of a history he never finished. Local family trees stretching back centuries. Stories half told in yellowed letters and faded photographs. In the margins, his penciled questions linger. What happened to the second daughter? Why did they leave in 1892? Questions are a kind of hope. I think a belief that truth is worth seeking, even if we never find the full answer. Finn has been helping me digitize the documents. Late afternoons, we sit side by side in the quiet of the Historical Society. The hum of the scanner, the only sound. Sometimes we talk about Dad, about the gaps in town records, about our own lives. Other times we work silently, and in those silences, something soft grows. Not the quick flame of new romance, but something steadier. Trust rebuilding itself. Word by word. At first, it felt strange to share this work. Dad's letters had been just for me. His secrets had felt like mine alone to carry. But over time, I've learned that memory kept in darkness only grows heavier. Telling this story, even just to Finn or Odie, makes it lighter, not because it hurts less, but because it no longer feels like my burden alone. One evening, as the last scan finished, Finn turned to me. "Your dad's project." It wasn't really about names and dates, was it? He asked. No, I said. It was about making sure people didn't vanish. Like Mom, whose wildflower garden had been ripped out. Like Dad himself, almost buried under Dolores' lies. And like me, nearly convinced I didn't belong in my own family story, I still visit the cemetery, though less often than before. The dogwoods above Dad's grave leafed out again this spring, soft green against the gray stone. Sometimes I bring a new wildflower from the garden and leave it on the headstone, not as an offering, but as a conversation. At first, I come with questions I never dared ask when he was alive. Why didn't you fight harder? Why did you let her come between us? But grief, like time, softens sharp edges. Now I come mostly to share. Small victories, new pages drafted for the book, the scholarship I won for research on New England family archives. In those quiet visits, I've begun to understand that loving someone doesn't mean pretending they were perfect. Dad failed me and also loved me fiercely. Both truths live side by side, like root and thorn in the same vine. The house itself no longer belongs to us. After the trial, I donated it to the Historical Society. Some people asked if it was hard to let go of the place where I'd grown up, but truthfully, it felt right. Homes are more than walls and rooms. They're stories. And this house had held. Too many that Delora tried to erase. Giving it to the town meant its stories, my family's stories, would be remembered by more than just me. Now, school groups tour the downstairs rooms where Dad did his research. In the restored garden, volunteers teach children how to plant seeds that bloom in spring. And in the small study, a glass case holds the oak box Dad left me, alongside a plaque explaining what it meant, a promise kept, a truth reclaimed. First time I saw the plaque, my throat closed. Not just because of what it said, but because someone else had written it quietly, without telling me. When I asked him why, he shrugged and said, because it was yours to reclaim, and you did. That, more than anything, felt like healing. Sometimes people ask me why I stayed to tell this story instead of trying to forget. It would have been easier to turn away, to leave Elmsbrook and never look back. But forgetting would have meant leaving Dad behind too. And Mom, and the stubborn, hopeful love that survived even Dolores' careful destruction. Remembering hurts, but forgetting would have hurt more. And so, in small rooms lit by desk lamps and quiet afternoons, I keep writing. About Dad's hidden. Letters about Mom's wildflowers, about how even in the deepest betrayal, love can leave a trail for us to follow back home. It isn't just a story about what Delora did. It's a story about what Dad tried to do, about the love that outlived him. And about a daughter who finally found her way through the labyrinth of doubt and fear to something like peace. As I write, I'm not just telling this story for myself. I'm telling it for anyone who's ever felt erased, silenced, or made to believe they didn't matter. To say, you do. Even if someone tries to bury your place in the story, the truth remembers. And love, when it's real, finds a way to be heard. It surprises me sometimes. What returns after you think it's gone for good? Trust, laughter, even a sense of belonging that feels earned, not borrowed. When I first began sorting through Dad's research, I thought it would be something private, a way to grieve, to make sense of him as more than the man who wrote me letters from behind locked doors. But grief has a way of leading us where we didn't expect to go. The more I read his notes and marginalia, the more I heard his voice urging me not just to remember, but to share. So I kept writing. Pages filled late at night in my dorm room, on trains back to Elmsbrook, at the wooden table in Odie's bookshop. Not just about what Delora had done, but about what she hadn't destroyed, the stubborn thread of love between Dad and me. The wildflower seeds Mom planted that outlasted pruning shears. The truth that refused to stay buried. At first, the words felt fragile, as if speaking them aloud would make them crumble. But the more I wrote, the more solid they became, like stones laid into a path I could walk back over and over, each telling making the way clearer. Finn has become part of that path. It didn't happen all at once. After the trial, we kept our distance, both of us worn thin by guilt and what ifs. But when I came back to Elmsbrook to work on the house archives, he was there sometimes helping, sometimes just sitting quietly nearby. One evening, as the last visitors left the historical society, asked him why he'd stayed after everything. His answer was quiet, almost shy. Because someone had to stand beside you, and I wanted it to be me. I realized then that love doesn't always arrive like lightning. Sometimes it's a hand that doesn't let go, a presence beside you when the world feels too loud. And sometimes it grows slowly, like roots finding stone and wrapping around it until the rock itself changes shape. We don't call it anything yet, not friendship, not love, but it feels honest, and that's enough. At the house, small miracles keep unfolding. The wildflowers, once ripped out, bloom again each season. Volunteers found daffodil bulbs Mom planted years ago, forgotten beneath the soil. They burst through the earth this spring, yellow and stubborn. As hope dots sometimes, standing in that garden, I think of Mom's hands in the dirt, planting for a spring she wouldn't live to see. And I understand now that love doesn't always look like presence. Sometimes it looks like planning for someone else's tomorrow. Inside. The study has become part museum, part archive, and part living space where visitors can read Dad's letters, listen to recordings of his lectures, and see his handwriting preserved behind glass. Some days, I catch tourists staring at the display, and it strikes me as strange. The story that once felt like mine alone now belongs, in a small way, to them too, and yet sharing it hasn't emptied it of meaning. If anything, it's deepened it, because now it's not just about what happened to me, but what survived through me. Odie still calls every Sunday. We talk about mundane things, what new title is selling at our shop, what I had for lunch, the wildflowers. Sometimes we don't talk about the past at all. And that, too, feels like healing, the freedom to speak of other things. She came to visit last month, standing beside me in the garden, her hand warm on my shoulder. "Your mother would be so damn proud of you," she whispered. And for the first time, I believed her completely. The book is nearly finished. What began as a personal reckoning has become something broader, a testament to memory's resilience, to the way truth threads through even the deepest shadows. I write not just about Dad's hidden letters and Dolores' crimes, but about small, everyday acts of remembrance. A neighbor who still keeps a photo of my mother in her hallway. Mabel's stories of Sunday dinners. Even the old elm tree marked for removal still standing. It isn't a story of perfect justice. Dad is still gone, and nothing can undo what was taken. But it is a story of love that refused to die, and of a girl who refused to stay silent. When I shared the draft with Finn, he read it quietly, then looked up and said, "This is more than your story, Eska. It's a story about how none of us truly disappear if someone remembers." That feels true. And it feels like enough. In the end, what grows back isn't what was lost. The garden doesn't look exactly as it did when Mom planted it. Dad's study will never smell like his pipe tobacco again. And I will never be the girl I was before. Loss taught me to question love. But what grows back is still alive, still stubborn, and sometimes even more beautiful for having had to break the surface twice. As spring returns to Elmsbrook, I walk the garden paths, notebook in hand, and realize maybe the point was never to make things exactly as they were. Maybe the point was to keep planting, even when you don't know what will survive. Sometimes I think about the way stories shift depending on who tells them. For 2 years, Dolores' version nearly became the only one. That Dad had drifted from me. That I was a mistake he regretted. That love could be edited out like a crooked line in a painting. But memory doesn't vanish just because someone covers it up. It waits quiet, stubborn, alive beneath the surface, like seeds under winter soil. In finishing the book, I realized it wasn't just my story I was telling. It was Dad's too. The man who left me breadcrumbs and letters in hidden rooms because he believed love should speak, even if his voice faltered. It was Mom's story too. The woman who planted daffodils and wildflowers without knowing if she'd be here to see them bloom. And it was mine, not the version of the daughter who was left out, but the one who chose not to stay erased. The final chapter took months to write. Every time I thought it was done, I'd remember something else. The smell of pipe smoke on Dad's. Sweaters, the way Mom's hair would come loose from her braid when she laughed. The sound of the rain on the study windows when I read on the floor as a child. Small details, but together they formed a map back to who we were before grief and betrayal in the end. That was what mattered most, not just what Delora did, but what she failed to destroy. The way love can echo forward in stubborn, ordinary acts, a letter kept, a flower replanted, a story finally told. When the proofs came back from the publisher, I brought them to the cemetery. The dogwoods had just started to bloom, pale pink against gray sky. I sat by Dad's grave, the manuscript heavy in my lap, and read the first pages aloud. Some truths are buried deeper than graves, I began, my voice catching on the words. He'd once written to me, it wasn't just an introduction, it was a promise. That would have been hidden would be seen. That silence wouldn't have the last word. When I finished, the breeze lifted the edges of the pages as if someone unseen had turned them gently. I pressed my hand against the cold stone. We did it, I whispered, together. The book comes out in spring. It's a small press run, nothing flashy. But it feels like enough. Dad's letters appear in facsimile, his handwriting curling across the pages like a voice breaking time. Readers will see not only what he wrote, but what he risked by writing it all, and it matters. It matters because somewhere, someone who feels forgotten might recognize themselves in our story and remember that erasure isn't destiny. That love leaves traces even in silence. Finn wrote the afterword. It surprised me when he offered, but his words felt right. In the end, what saves us isn't perfect memory, but the willingness to remember it all. This story is about a family nearly lost to silence, and the daughter who refused to stop speaking. Sometimes I still visit the house. Not every week now, but when the dogwoods are in bloom or the garden needs tending. Volunteers keep it alive, but they leave the wildflowers messy on purpose, because memory, like love, shouldn't be too neat. Once, a woman on a tour asked if I resented the house after all that happened. I told her the truth. No, because it isn't only where I lost my father, it's also where I found him again. Odie keeps my first author copy on the counter at her bookshop, right by the register. When I told her it felt too showy, she shook her head. Your mother would want people to see it, she said, and so do I. She's right. It's not about pride, it's about proof. Proof that even if someone tried to cut me out, I wrote. Myself back in. Some days grief still visits quiet, familiar, no longer sharp-edged. I let it sit beside me, let it remind me of what was lost and why it mattered. But it doesn't pull me under anymore. Other days, I walk the wildflower paths and think about what comes next. Maybe another book, maybe a fellowship to keep working. On Dad's unfinished histories. Maybe something entirely unexpected. I don't know, and for once, that feels okay. Because I no longer need the past to stay frozen to feel rooted. The truth Dad left me, the garden Mom planted, the love I've chosen and been given, they're enough foundation to build from. And so this is what remains, a garden that blooms again, even after it's been torn out. A house once stripped of. Love now open to memory. A daughter who found her father's voice, and in doing so, found her own. Not the story Delora tried to write in shadows and locked rooms, but the one Dad and I finished together in letters and hidden compartments, and, finally, in words shared with anyone willing to listen. Love didn't save us from loss, but it saved us from disappearing. And sometimes that is the greater miracle. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.